African Americans have been fighting for their lives for hundreds of years now, and the Black Lives Matter movement is the people uniting once again to call out the systematic racism that not only hinders and makes dreams 10 times more difficult for African Americans, but they literally kill them, strip them away of their potential. As a Puerto Rican American, I've always identified myself as a minority. But because I look white, I know that my privilege allows me to have better chances at my dreams than people of darker complexion. And this is a hard truth that I recently accepted. In this podcast, I discuss my deeper realizations through the racism I witnessed my friends and family incur, the mindset behind racism, and what I believe the long-term solution should be. Please listen and understand that the intention of this episode is to raise consciousness for all human beings. The purpose is to unite all by elevating and changing our perception of the world. And this process starts by listening to the difficult stories and history of an oppressed people in this country. Black Lives Matter. Hey, what's up, guys? Come to the realization, the hard realization that all dreams are not the same. So this podcast, I'm going to talk about my perspectives on being Black in America. And to be honest, I have no idea what that means. I can't empathize or imagine what a Black man, Black woman, Afro-Latina, Afro-Latino person has to go through in this country. So I want to dive deep into some of my stories where there is an opportunity to learn about race, to learn about the differences among Latinos and among myself and African Americans. So for me, I really never looked at color because, I considered myself part of the African American community to an extent. I played basketball, which is predominantly a Black sport. So a lot of my friends were Black. Even my Hispanic friends were darker than I am. My father he looks Middle Eastern. He's darker than me. So I never really saw that because I always connected with people of color, darker complexion, very well. And my father my father was a teacher in the Bronx, so he brought me to the Bronx, and I had a lot of friends that were, Dominican and Puerto Rican that were darker, had a lot of friends that were Black. So I never really saw color. So I never understood the privilege that I had until, the lighting of the recent events that we have. And I knew racism existed, and I just believed that all people, to an extent, are racist. But the problem with racism in this country is that it's systematically woven into our education, into the allocation of resources, into just humanity and our rights as Americans. So I started reflecting on some of the stories that I've been through. And there are a few, man. I remember the only times that I've gotten stopped by police were when I first started driving. I was like 17, 18 years old. I had my Lexus ES250. I had the subwoofers. I would play reggaeton inside there. The subwoofers that light up. I was that corny. Young Latino man playing his music. And the times I would get stopped are when I had my Afro-Latino friends inside or my Black friends inside the car. The times that I would get pulled out of the car and searched were because I had Black friends with me. And I never understood it. I thought it was because I had the Puerto Rican flag behind the rearview mirror, which I think played a part. But it was because of my Black friends. One time I was in Teaneck, and me and my Dominican friend were crossing the street, and he looks Black. uh, and we got pulled over for jaywalking. Like, who the hell gets pulled over for jaywalking? And two kids. We were 17 years old. And yeah, the cop basically gave us tickets for jaywalking, white cop. And I remember going to Aruba with my best friend Jay. And when I came back, I had a warrant for my arrest because I didn't pay that ticket. Actually, speaking about my best friend Jay, one time we took a trip to Spain, and we had gone to Morocco for a day. There's like a ferry that takes 45 minutes to go into Morocco, and then we were coming back. The two friends, Jay, my best friend Jay, and another friend of mine, Kyle, both black. So we go, and obviously there's Spanish security guards there and everything like that. There's no like, they check your passport, stuff like that. But I walked through. I'm white. Security didn't ask me questions, didn't pat me down, nothing like that. So I'm walking through, and then I don't see my friends next to me anymore. And I turn back, and they're getting searched and patted down by Spanish officers, two black guys. And at that time, I didn't think anything of it because, my best friend Jay, he's a clown. And, he's just like, yo, they patted me down. And I had no underwear. So when he grabbed my nuts, he felt everything. And we just started laughing. And it was just an experience. But how I was never able to realize my privilege in that moment. I can never understand the mindset and the perspective that people of darker complexion in this country have to go through, even by shades. And like in the black community, if you're darker, at least from what I heard and what I've seen my friends talk about, if you're darker, it's like not a good thing. If you're a darker Hispanic, Dominicans are very big on, what they believe is you need to be white in order to be pure in that country. And for years, their dictator at that time, Trujillo, promoted being white. Like he even built a statue where he had white features and white skin, and he didn't look nothing like that goddamn statue. So it's so interesting to see all my stories kind of coming to this point and making me realize my white privilege. Even in my relationships, I've had girlfriends that were of darker complexion. I've had a girlfriend that was half black, half white. I had a girlfriend who was Dominican, Puerto Rican, but she looked black. And one time I was in an argument with her because she was talking about being Afro-Latina. And I couldn't understand it because I was like, yeah, we're all the same. Like, yo, we're Latinos, man. Like, we're on the same page. And she's like, no, we're not. Like, it's not the same for us. It's not the same for you and I. And I couldn't understand where she was coming from. And that was a big argument between us at that time. My half black, half white girlfriend, we had a discussion one time about having children. And, she told me, she was like, I don't know if I want to have kids with you because, I'm afraid my children will come out white. And I couldn't understand why that was the case. She wouldn't be able to identify with our hypothetical white kids if they came out white. And I couldn't understand her and what it means to be an interracial child in this country. And now I'm coming to the realization that, my whole life has been a privilege. My whole life has been an advantage. And I, obviously, I can get away with a lot more than an African American does. I don't have to walk outside my house and be worried about being killed by a cop. Those are realistic possibilities for the African American community and Afro Latinos. It just made me realize I can understand why people of darker complexion, may not chase after their dreams. It's a shutdown in your belief system. It's a rejection to your face that you are just worrying about surviving in this country rather than chasing your dreams. And for me, I never even thought about it that way because, I'm white. So it made me start thinking about our belief system and what I've been studying here and building with Rancis at Vita Project, and how it comes down to your perspective and your model of the world. I know that there are amazing white people in this country. I know that there are great cops in this country. But there is something in our education system that doesn't allow us to change our belief system and our perspective of the world. And depending on the allocation of resources that you have in your area, depends on the quality of education that you get. And because of that, we tend to have our belief system provided to us by our friends and families. And if they didn't receive the right education, if they didn't receive true education, then their belief system didn't change because they got it from their grandparents and the people that they surround themselves with. So now these people go into authoritative positions, and now they have their belief system woven in that authoritative position. And it comes from a sense of inferiority. It comes from a sense of feeling like you are not good enough. So you go into this authoritative position to gain power because you don't want to be oppressed. And this is the fundamental issue with racism, no matter what color you are, because there's racism in any form. It's this sense of your ego feeling like it's nothing. And that's what I think is the issue, the fundamental root issue. When you go down to the root of racism, it's that issue that these people who are racist are ego-based and feel that a black man or a person of darker complexion is better than they are. And they feel that way because honestly, like, we look at African Americans and people dark, they're amazingly talented people, and they evolved to be that way. Think about this, like 400 years of being in slavery. You're thinking about 400 years of developing a skill, developing their bodies based on the work that they did. You made them work for over 15 hours a day in the field, pushing sleds, picking cotton, digging holes, just physically working. Of course they're going to be amazing athletes. Of course that's genetically passed down. When you put them alone and they have no books to read and they have no formal education for hundreds of years, they're going to be great at singing. They're going to be great at acting. They're going to be great at entertaining because that was the only way that they could get through the times. So it's evolution in its natural form, because as human beings, we are anti-fragile. We have the opportunity to take our circumstances and become stronger from them. And African Americans are very, very strong. And I think that scares the shit out of white people, at least white people who are racist. I think that scares them. I think it makes them feel inferior. And when I think about cops, I think about 3 different versions of cops. I think about the ex-athlete who was a superstar in high school and, didn't really focus on his studies. So he wanted that same feeling of authority or that same feeling of power, so he becomes a cop, right, to fulfill his ego. The other individual, I think, is the one who was nobody in high school and was disregarded as someone important in his community. So he becomes a cop to then become important and feel that he has some form of authority. And then we have honest cops that really want to help the community, who really want to help people. And it's the same thing with teachers and any public position. So when we think about that, we're thinking about a sense of inferiority that is somehow connected to the ego, that has nothing to do with African Americans. It has everything to do with your need to feeling superior over somebody else and your insecurities as a human being. So then we move to education, and like the long-term solution to solve racism in this country is a real education, not one that is focused on content or subject matter, but one that is focused on how to live your happiest life and how to learn about yourself. Our education system should be focusing on empathy, compassion, social justice, and how to live a life. That's one foundation, right? Given the opportunity, evening out the playing field for all people in this country, because the allocation of resources in this country is not fair, and in its just basic principle. We have less money going to African American and Latino children who don't receive proper education, where their teachers are underpaid, where they don't have the right books, they don't have the right programs after school. And white children in white neighborhoods and in neighborhoods who are more affluent, they have the resources and their parents have the money to send them to after school programs and to work with tutors and all these different things. So it's not a even playing field. From the get, it's not. So the one long-term solution right now is a reform in education. What is actually important to make this country great again? It's not about learning math. Like, we can go on the internet and learn math. I can go to Khan Academy and learn calculus right now. I can go to, YouTube and watch a bunch of videos, right? It's really about understanding self, so that when we do get into positions of leadership, we're not abusing that leadership. We are actually truly leaders trying to help a community. And that's fundamental in a sense. Like, if we want a change in the United States, long-term change, we need to think about education. We need to think about what it is to be a human being. We need to elevate human consciousness. And within our own communities, within our own ethnicities, we need to understand ourselves and our culture and where we derive from. Because as a Latino, I know that racism is a huge problem in our world, our culture. I think Latinos are what it is to be white and black. We have African blood in our lineage. My great grandmother was from the Canary Islands of Africa. She was black on my father's side. And I know that some of my features, even though I look really white, some of my features are from African lineage. I probably get my rhythm from African lineage. So I think fundamentally within our cultures, whether you're Middle Eastern, whether you're white, whether you're black, you need to understand where you come from to really truly understand how to empathize with other races, how to truly empathize with other people who speak different languages. Language is nothing but a bunch of words and symbols that allow us to communicate. And when we understand those things, we can truly come together as a people. That our cultures and our traditions are nothing but a way of living. It does not identify us. And I think that's important, because especially for the Latino community, especially for now, I think the Latino community has an opportunity to truly stand next to their brothers and sisters and help the African American community, because we are the one type of people that are everything. We look Indian, we look black, we look white, we look Middle Eastern, we look like everything. And we in this country, in the United States, can possibly be the majority of people within the next 20 to 30 years. So if it's anyone that should be standing next to the African American community, are Latinos. And if you're standing there saying all lives matter and that you're going to stay quiet and you're going to stay neutral because you're afraid of changing status quo, then you are part of the problem as well. I argued with my mother yesterday because of this. Of course she's afraid. We're all afraid. The whole country's afraid about what's going to happen. We have a fucking virus and we have protests in the street. I think it hasn't been since the civil rights movement, since like all the 50 states were in protest. This is a difficult time for everyone, but it does not mean that you let fear take control. You have to stand up for a better future in this country. You have to stand up for your people, because the African American community, those are our brothers and sisters. We derive from the same place. If you're Puerto Rican, if you're Cuban, if you are Dominican, if you are Haitian, if you're Mexican, Brazilian, Colombian, it doesn't matter where you're from, anywhere in South America, you have African lineage somewhere in your blood. And even if you don't, that you're so fucking European, your language, your dialect, the food that you eat, the music that you listen to has influence from Africa. If you listen to salsa, bachata, merengue, if you eat plátanos, mangú, mofongo, understand that those are African influences. If you listen to hip hop, if you listen to any jazz, if you listen to any rock, that has African influence. If you love basketball, if you love football, all comes from African influences. Whether it started that way or African Americans enhanced it. It does not matter. If you are into any of those things, just understand that you partake in African American culture. You partake in African culture. That means that if you love those things, you should be standing next to your brothers and sisters and fighting for those things. Because if it wasn't for their influence, we wouldn't be who we are today. We wouldn't have the enjoyment in those things today. So if you're out there right now and you're not sure what to do, you need to fight. Whether it be donating, whether it be going out to the streets and protesting, whether it be having a conversation with your white friends or your family members who are not sure what to believe and not sure how to take this, or are afraid of changing the status quo. Make them understand that if they're light-skinned, they're privileged. If you are Hispanic, you are more privileged in this country than an African American. And as long as they're aware of those things, they may be able to empathize just a little bit with the African American community and Afro-Latinos. Just a little bit. We'll never understand that. We'll never understand their perspective or their traumas or experiences. Never. But what we can do is empathize and stand next to them. We don't need to feel guilty. We don't need to talk about our experiences. We need to talk about how we can help them. And that means standing next to them and supporting their voice, making their voice louder so that our government can hear it and our education system can truly change, and that we focus on the things that are actually important in this country. Human consciousness. This is only my perspective of racism, but there are people who've actually encountered it firsthand. And listening to their stories is how we begin to empathize with people who aren't given the same opportunities just because of their skin color. If we begin to open our minds and our hearts to these difficult conversations, then we begin the process of human enlightenment, and we become one step closer to building a peaceful planet. So take the time to educate yourself on true African American history. Native American history, Latino American history, and understand these contributions that these people made to this country. This is supposed to be the country where dreams come true, and that's still very real. But the hard fact is that it isn't the same for everyone. So we must take and make an initiative and an effort to even out this playing field. If not, then we are not achieving true human potential. Thank you again for listening to the episode of the Dreamer's Journey podcast. Please do not hesitate to leave messages or comments. You can find me on Moises_movesalot, or you can email me at moises@vitaproject.com. Till next time.